Right now, somewhere in your house, there is food you are not sharing. Maybe it's in the back of the fridge. Maybe it's in a cupboard you don't mention when guests are over. You didn't think twice about keeping it. Nobody taught you to hide it. And yet, you did. But for most of human history, that single instinct could have gotten you killed. Not by an animal, not by the cold, by your own tribe. Winter for early humans was not a season. It was a test, a slow, brutal audit of every relationship you had built over the past year. And anthropologists who have spent decades living alongside hunter-gatherer communities have found something strange sitting underneath almost all of them. A rule so consistent, so quietly enforced, that it barely needed to be spoken out loud. You did not survive winter by being strong. You survived it by being generous. And if you weren't, the tribe made sure you understood exactly what that meant. Let's go back further than farming, further than villages. Back to a time when the difference between a good year and a starving one wasn't measured in money or property, but in meat, roots, and stored fat. Anthropologist Kim Hill spent years studying the Ache people of Paraguay, one of the last living hunter-gatherer societies on Earth, and documented something that seems almost backwards to modern instincts. The best hunters in the group didn't keep the biggest portions for themselves. They gave most of it away. Not out of pure kindness, out of necessity. Hunting is unreliable. 1 week you bring down a large animal, the next 3 weeks you bring back nothing. If you kept everything you caught only for yourself and your immediate family, you'd feast for a few days and then starve through the lean stretch that always follows. But if the whole group shared everything, every failed hunt was covered by someone else's success. The math only worked as a group. It never worked alone. This is what researchers call a risk pooling system. Think of it as biological insurance thousands of years before the concept had a name. And winter is where this system was tested hardest. Warm months meant more food sources, more margin for error. Cold months stripped that margin away completely, which meant the unspoken rule of sharing, casual in summer, became sacred in winter. Hoarding wasn't just rude, it was a direct threat to everyone's survival, including your own children's. So tribes built something into their culture to stop it before it started. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm spent decades studying small-scale societies and found a pattern almost too consistent to be coincidence. Egalitarian hunter-gatherer groups actively, aggressively suppressed anyone who tried to dominate resources or hoard status. Not through formal laws, through something far more effective: gossip, mockery, public shame. In extreme cases, exile. Boehm called this a reverse dominance hierarchy. Instead of the strongest person controlling the group controlled anyone who tried to become too strong, too greedy, or too self-serving. If you brought back a large kill and tried to quietly keep most of it, you wouldn't be met with violence first. You'd be met with jokes, sharp ones, aimed directly at your pride. Among the Ju/Hoanzi of the Kalahari, documented extensively by anthropologist Richard Lee, a successful hunter was expected to talk down his own kill. Insult it even. Call it scrawny, barely worth carrying home. This wasn't false modesty for its own sake. It was a survival mechanism disguised as humor. If you bragged about your success, you invited resentment. If you downplayed it, you kept the group bonded instead of divided. Do you see the shape of it yet? The rule wasn't just about food, it was about status. And status in these groups was never allowed to translate into a right to keep more for yourself. The moment it did, the whole cooperative system was at risk of collapsing. Here's where it gets stranger. This wasn't limited to hunting. Sarah Hardy, a primatologist who has studied the evolutionary roots of human cooperation, argues that humans became what she calls cooperative breeders. Unlike most primates, human children could not survive on the care of one mother alone. They needed aunts, grandmothers, neighbors, sometimes people with no blood relation at all. Winter made this dependency even sharper. A parent who fell ill or lost a food source in the cold months needed the group to absorb that loss, or the child simply didn't make it to spring. Which means the sharing rule wasn't a nice cultural extra. It was load-bearing. Remove it, and the entire structure holding up early human survival came down with it. Now here's the twist that changes how you should think about your own instincts today. You would assume this kind of generosity came from something soft: warmth, love, community spirit. But researchers studying these systems found the
Fear
opposite
of
engine
being the
running
one
underneath.
left out,
When
fear
you were the one who failed to bring anything home, fear of being talked about behind your back, fear of becoming the person nobody helps when your own luck runs out. The generosity wasn't purely selfless. It was self-interest, dressed in the language of care, enforced by the terrifying possibility of being cut off. And this is the part your brain still remembers, even now, in a world with refrigerators and supermarkets and none of the immediate threat of starvation. Psychologists studying modern cooperation, including work built on the foundations laid by evolutionary theorists like Robert Rivers on reciprocal altruism, have found that humans are still wired to track who gives and who takes. You notice when a coworker never buys the coffee round. You remember who showed up when you moved apartments and who didn't. You feel a small, specific discomfort around people who take without ever offering anything back. That discomfort is old, older than money, older than agriculture. It's the same social alarm system that once decided whether you'd be fed through a famine or quietly, politely left to fend for yourself. Here's where it gets uncomfortable for how you live now. Modern life has removed most of the immediate danger from hoarding. You can stockpile as much as you want, and no one will starve because of it. At least not visibly, not directly, not in your own tribe. The consequence has been separated from the action by layers of supply chains and anonymity, which means the ancient enforcement mechanism, the shame, the gossip, the social pressure has nothing left to grip onto. But the instinct to hoard is still there. So is the instinct to judge those who do it, even when you can't always explain why it bothers you. Think about how sharply people react to visible greed today. Someone who buys up limited supplies during a shortage, a person who never splits a bill evenly, a company accused of hoarding profits while workers struggle. The outrage feels disproportionate to modern eyes, almost primitive. But it isn't irrational, it's ancestral. Your brain is running code written for small bands of 30 to 50 people, where one person's excess directly meant someone else's hunger. You feel that old winter logic even when there's no winter left to survive. There's a quieter version of this rule that still shows up in your own life, and you've probably never named it. The friend you call first when something goes wrong. The person you'd help move furniture for without being asked twice. The neighbor you check on during a storm. These relationships are built on the same invisible ledger your ancestors kept in their heads through every hard season. Not a ledger of money, a ledger of who shows up. And the tribes that survived winter after winter weren't the ones with the most talented hunters or the strongest individuals. They were the ones who kept that ledger honest, who made sure no one quietly slipped into keeping more than their share, who understood on some level none of them could have explained in words, that a person's strength only mattered if it fed the group around them. So the next time you feel that small pull to hold something back, whether it's food, time, credit for an idea, or help someone clearly needs, pay attention to it. It's not a modern flaw, it's an old signal, echoing from a world where sharing wasn't generosity. It was survival. And somewhere in you it still is.